because you've learned something new that excited you, that brought some passion to you, and now you want to include that as part of your vision, or the way you perceive that vision might have shifted and changed. So we are continuously changing. It is who we are as human beings. It is one of our innate human rights and abilities to adapt, to co-evolve with our environment. Oh, just an example of that adaptation in nature. And this is on our property, by the way. If anyone, if you come to visit us, it's an amazing place. So I promised to go through some of the mechanisms for influencing complex situations. David, maybe we'll share this a little bit.
Well, you can do it. Go ahead.
Well, the first one's a very easy one, structural adaptation. Basically, if you don't like something, well, break it open, change the structure, and reform it and reshape it in another way. That's one way to change a problem. But maybe that structure has been around a long time, and maybe there's a lot of other things to come around, and it will be hard to reorganize. So you're going to have to look at some other alternatives. Boundary management. Managing the boundary conditions to shift the energy affecting the system. David, maybe you could talk for a second about that.
Yeah, this makes some assumptions, and to interpret them, there's not a simple interpretation. Depends upon the circumstance, of course. But if you have one organization and you're in the process of melding another organization into it, or you're going into an organization that has a problem, you need to look at the boundaries of the organization to make sure that those boundaries are not creating problems for you. Too much information coming in, the wrong information coming in, the wrong products going out. How does the organization interact with its external world, and is that influencing the organization, which it certainly will be to some extent, and creating problems in the organization if it cannot change, for example. It cannot be flexible enough to adapt to new markets or to economic downturns, things like that.
So maybe
too many people there. So look to the boundaries as one way of observing the organization when you're trying to understand it to make changes.
Absorption, there's a G missing. Bringing the complex situation into a larger complex system. So maybe something is happening here and you're going to make it part of something larger in order to help resolve the original problem by dissolving that part of the system. This is very different than structural adaptation where you change the structure. This is actually embedding the system into another system where it sort of loses its importance as a separate system and it's functioning okay here, and this no longer is a consequence.
Yeah, the structural adaptation incidentally is a very handy thing for organizations to have these days because it helps in sustainability. Sometimes you must adjust that structure to change to the external world. Absorption, when I sold my company, it was bought out by a company about 10 times larger, as usual, and over the next year and a half, it was amazing the changes that were forced into my ex-company because they had to do it the way the big company is. And there was a whole process of going through, and it was painful to a lot of people.
And it was broken down and done a little bit.
Sure.
An example that came to mind for a poorer case of structural adaptation is FEMA. When FEMA was broken down and then brought into Homeland Security, we let go of a lot of the things that really should have been kept part of it. So that's where that didn't work very well.
Optimum complexity. You can change the complexity of your organization or where you work if you realize that complexity simply or can be viewed as a measure of options you have in dealing with a subject or dealing with another organization or an individual. How many options do you have? That's a Simon.
Well, Akoff's very famous thing, Russell Acoff, was that you need to have more things in your change strategy than you have to have in the system that you're changing into. More activity underway than that which you desire to change. So there is an optimum complexity level. If you have too much, you're there bordering on our discussion earlier, chaos and going over. If you have not enough, then you don't have the options that you need in order to shift and change as the environment changes. So there's an optimum complexity level that is by choice, ensuring you have as many options to deal with the problem than there are in the problem. Simplification.
That is typically used in terms of if you don't understand the complexity of the problem, you simply make a decision and go. You simplify it in your own mind and thinking, well, this is the problem, and go do it. And of course, frequently that fails and it backfires on you. In fact, Alex and I and one other person spent a half a day with J.W. Forrester some of you may know him, Systems Dynamics.
Many years
This
ago.
goes back about 20 years ago. But anyway, he founded System Dynamic Modeling and System Dynamics. And in the conversations with him, he brought out very clearly that if you have a complex adaptive system and you push it, it will respond in the way you want it to for about 3 to 6 months, depending on the system, of course. But after that, it will respond, and then it will turn and come back and haunt you and make it much worse. And the example he gave was building more and better highways from cities, centers of cities out. Says you think you're going to relieve the traffic, you will in fact find traffic harder 2, 5, 10 years later. So you have to be very careful in interacting with a complex system as to how you do it.
And why? Why would that be? Why would you find that traffic harder 5 years out? Just putting it on the spot.
Because the freedom of the road attracts people, and the more people you have, the more cars you have.
Maybe some more
It's a
roads
feedback
coming in.
system.
Sense and respond. So basically taking a testing approach. Now, this can be tied to a simplification where you can, in a positive way, identify part of the system, simplify something that you think you can handle, and start a sense and response and see if it can now go to the larger whole. So you observe, perturb, and study the response. Amplification is a shotgun effect. It's taking a variety of actions to determine which ones are successful. So I don't know what's causing it, so I'm going to do a whole bunch of things, and I'm going to follow the trail and try to figure out if any of those help. Now, of course, emergence. So this is a little hard to follow when you do a lot of actions, because it's going to be the interaction of those actions is probably going to cause something. But that's not negative if it's heading the organization the way you want it. And then C. Go ahead.
What's the movie? I forgot the name of it.
Which movie?
The guy that wrote it.
Amadeus?
No,
No, that's a good one too.
I honestly don't remember the name. But anyway,
Oh, no. Oh, I remember that movie. I know what you're talking about.
now you're in trouble.
Tell the story.
Yeah, I'll tell you.
It'll come up.
It's a good example of seeding. This playwright writes a movie years ago and puts it on, and it fails. It's supposed to be a comedy, and it fails.
Just Peter Pan.
No, not Peter Pan. Anyway, so the story in the movie goes on and goes through. He's still going to do it, so he does it a second time, and talks about all the goods and bads and things like that. But when a year and a half later, when he has a revised version, he invites 50 children, ragamuffin children, this was in the 1800s now, to come in and gives them free seats, and he scatters the seats randomly among all of the seating. There's maybe 500 people there. So as the show ends, the show starts, goes through, it's almost the same stuff, and immediately the kids start laughing because they find it funny. And what you hear is once 1 or 2 or 3 of those young children laugh, then all the highfalutin people who are well-dressed and everything, who don't like the kids there, etc., they start laughing. And before long, everybody is hilarious because it's a very funny movie.
Big successful opening. It was a stage show.
So you see what he's done? He's seeded the thing that says it's okay to laugh.
Yeah.
Because these people were staid, 1800s, stuff like that. You can do the same way with an organization. Another example gets back to Singapore. Singapore took 10 years to turn their organization into a learning organization. Now, they have roughly 50,000 full-time military and about 300,000 reserves, and they have a certain number of 18-year-olds come in every year. But it took them 10 years. How did they do it? They went first and found about, I think it was 3 real sharp lieutenant colonels and majors and said, are you interested in organizational learning? And they talked with them. And they sent them over to, guess where? Peter Senge, MIT, for a year, 2 years, usually to get a master's degree, and then they brought them back, and they put 1 or 2 or 3 of them in different parts of the organization, and they let them start working. The second year, they picked 5 and did the same thing. The third year, I think it was 25 or 30. Within about 4 or 5 years, they had, 100 people who were well educated in organizational learning and what to do and so forth, and they were starting to build the seeding for the organization to move it into a learning organization. It actually took them about 10 years if you trace the history, and they're writing a book right now that Alex and I have edited for them, and it will describe the sequence. But that's seeding. See what I mean? And you can do it in an organization if you're willing to be patient enough and spend the money to do it. You know, you can change an organization's culture over time, but you can't do it quickly. Except, I can give you an instance where, I don't know how many people, probably 50 million people changed their mind in about 6 seconds.
I haven't heard this.
Yeah, everybody has. A radio announcement by the President of the United States. Japan has attacked Pearl Harbor. Any of you remember that? I know you weren't there, but the point is, the whole nation was changed instantly from an emotional viewpoint. Instantly, 6 words. And believe me, it did change.
We were there for 911. Same
Yeah,
happened.
911, similar topic. So there are things that happen that can change us quickly. That doesn't mean they're good.
The wedding last weekend. Anyone watch?
Okay,
Excuse me, David, a question?
yes.
In Singapore, there had to be a group with a vision.
Yes.
Why did they have this new vision that they wanted to change?
Well, they have 3 phases that they've gone through since 1965, which is when they were first formed. That's when Britain left Singapore, and they were on their own, and they're close to Malaysia and some other areas there that could be touchy-touchy from a military viewpoint, and they didn't want their island to be taken over. So that's when they first started with about, I think it was 4,000 or 5,000 military. And they've grown from there, but they've actually gone through 3 different stages or visions, if you will. Vision 1, Vision 2, now they're in Vision 3, and that was, 40 years? Each one very slow.
Well,
They are forward-looking people. They send their sharpest military to graduate school all over the world, and they're the best graduate schools they can find. In the United States, it's a typical MIT or Harvard or Stanford. In Britain, they go to Oxford. In Australia, they've got several companies, so forth and so on. And they send them there for 2 years, 3 years, bring them back. Now they've got somebody who knows something that the foreigners have created. That is, the professors there see it from a certain way, so they can bring that back in. And they also have made connections with that country, which is very important to Singapore because they need the big countries, the U.S., Australia, Great Britain, Israel, to back up in case something happens. And they're well aware of the importance of a political response there.
Okay, the largest population is Chinese. A lot of them comes out of the Confucianist era of philosophy. They are a collective people. When they were stood up in 67,
65,
67, right there, they had form and no function. So they were immediately threatened by the area. They had to put up a good show, put up a really good show in order to not be, and it was by luck really that they were not taken a couple of times, taken over. So they knew how important their military organization was. And so since they didn't have the answers and didn't have the capability, the knowledge, they picked out the best around the world that had what they needed. So they sent the commandos to train in Israel,